This is Dialogue. Dialogue, a presentation of the Public Affairs and Special Events Department of KLRB News.
This is Dialogue Assassination with research specialist May.
Hey, thanks everybody for joining tonight. May and the Magic Bullet got a jam-packed show for you tonight. But first, let's see what May had to say about it. She said, "There's no safety in silence. You people that sit there and don't speak up or shout, I'll shout until I die. When I saw those people and I knew they died, I said I'd rather live 1 hour the way I'm living than to sit there like a zombie and let it happen and not to speak up. And that's why we're here today." Indeed, that's why we are here today. And today we're talking about Mr. David Berkowitz, son of Sam, also known as the 44 caliber killer, American serial killer, pled guilty to 8 shootings that began in New York City, July 1929. And these information comes from May's show. She covered this on July 18th, 1980, and also August 22nd and August 15th, 1977. So right after the shootings and during when those things were happening. And she has a lot to say about that. First, we're going to lay some background, talk about mind control a little bit. And I mean, people say that you could be called a conspiracy theorist for talking about mind control, but these things come right out of the horse's mouth. This is Dr. Jose Delgado talking here, and he was a former Spanish military guy, worked with Franco and the fascists there in Spain. And what he said in 1974, now this is the director of neuropsychiatry at Yale University, congressional testimony 1974, "We need a program of psychosurgery for the political control of society. Purpose is the physical control of the mind. Everyone who deviates from the given norm can be surgically mutilated. The individual may think that the most important reality is his own existence, but that is only his personal point of view that lacks historical perspective. Man does not have the right to develop his mind." So these are the kind of people that were in charge back in 1974, and you may see some parallels to today. He co-authored the first peer-reviewed paper describing long-term electrode implant in humans, and his work was funded by the Office of Naval Intelligence and the CIA, and was probably one of the MK Ultra programs. He implanted a stimoceiver in at least 25 humans, mostly women diagnosed with schizophrenia or epilepsy. The device implanted or pushed drugs into the system from the brain, and said that the brain transmitters can remain in the person's head for life. And he published a physical control of the mind towards a psycho-civilized society in which he foresees a new era when humans will undergo psycho-civilization by linking their brains directly to machines. Yeah, where have I heard that before or recently? I think there's something called a Neuralink out there that they're pushing these days. So here's a little bit more on Dr. Delgado. Let me get back up to him. So he is famous for stopping a charging bull. And you can go to YouTube and look at this video where he implants electrodes in the bull's brain, and on command of the electrode stops the charge of the bull. And this is from an interview that he did. And he said that, "Do you realize the fantastic possibilities if from the outside we could modify the inside? Could we give messages to the inside? But the beauty is now that we're not using electrodes." So this has progressed. And in recent years, Delgado has shown that behavior of monkeys can be altered using low power pulsing magnetic fields. But in these experiments, there were no antenna implants. Delgado says that any brain function, emotions, intellectual personality could be perhaps modified by this non-invasive technology. And to date, Delgado's research has so far been limited to animals, as far as we know. So let's go back. So this is from Darren Brown, who's a mentalist, and this is his show called Trick of the Mind, I think it was. But this is where he trained an assassin, somebody he picked out of a crowd at one of his shows to mock assassinate this guy, Stephen Fry, on stage in London. It's a very interesting show, and I would recommend looking at that for additional research if you get a chance. All right, so remember brainwashing. This is from the New York Times in 2008. And they're saying remembering, so I guess they think that this is not currently going on. What they're saying is that the idea that a totalitarian state could control people like Pavlov's dogs has appeared in 1940s novels. Arthur Koestler's Darkness at Noon, George Orwell's 1984, and it took Mao's China and the forced confessions of some American prisoners of war during the Korean conflict to make brainwashing a centerpiece of the 1950s culture. And this goes on to talk about finding out what others are thinking is and was and is the job of spies. North Korean experience spurred CIA's research for mind control techniques to grill suspected double agents. The agency took on tasks described in its documents as overseas interrogations. And if you were paying attention over the past 20 years or so, you would see that this photo here is very familiar and known, the prisoner torture at Abu Ghraib in Iraq. So the U.S. had clandestine prisons. They were created in occupied Germany and occupied Japan at Panama Canal Zone, at Lake Guantanamo, said a charter member of the CIA, Thomas Polgar. It was anything goes. And they used special techniques, conducted experiments in drug-induced brainwashing for interrogation and other matters, sure. And this continued inside and outside the United States, sometimes on unsuspecting human guinea pigs long after the Korean War ended in 1953. So this is from 2008 when things were still happening in these overseas black sites. Richard Helms says there was a deep concern over the issue of brainwashing. He told journalist David Frost 25 years later, "We felt that it was our responsibility not to lag behind the Russians or the Chinese in this field. And the only way to find out what the risks were was to test such things as LSD and other drugs that could be used to control human behavior. These experiments went on for many, many years." You don't say. So this also mentioned in that article was Biederman's chart of coercion. And you can take a look at this offline, but it talks about all the communist methods of brainwashing and associates with some things that were happening very recently and may still be happening when you get a chance to have a look. Okay, so this is from CSIGlobe.com, CIA Secrets of Mind Control, talking about Martin Orne. Now, Martin Orne, Dr. Martin Orne is leading expert on hypnosis of the 20th century. So for 30 years, he edited the International Journal of Clinical and Experimental Hypnosis. He's one of two psychiatrists professionally still active into the late 90s who has documented CIA mind control contractor, along with Dr. Louis Jolyon West. So Jolly West of Tusco, the elephant fame. He killed the elephant by overdosing it on LSD and recorded it as an experiment. He's quite a character worthy of a show of his own, MK Ultra star, as it were. So this agent P. Janet asked a deeply hypnotized female to commit several murders before a distinguished group of judges, stabbing some victims with rubber daggers and poisoning others with sugar tablets. Subject did all these without hesitation. Army doctors were actively involved in LSD testing until late into the 70s. And subjects of LSD experiments included children as young as 5 years old. Brain electrodes were implanted in children as young as 11 years of age. 4 of the CIA MK Ultra subprojects were on children. So these mind-controlled doctors included presidents of the American Psychiatric Association and psychiatrists who received full-page obituaries in the American Journal of Psychiatry. So this goes on to say that responsibility for the unethical experimentation lies first with the individual doctors, but also collectively with the medical profession and with academia as a whole. So this ties right in with what we were talking about last week with Mengele, eugenics and medical ethics. So that was going on. This kind of follows through on what was happening in the United States back in the 70s. Let's go to Mr. Berkowitz. So this is kind of get started with Son of Sam. Now you have like the underlying idea that mind control and assassination program is possible. So Berkowitz was captured or arrested on August 10th in 1977. And this is kind of like the New York Times hallmark version of Berkowitz. He was a 24-year-old postal employee, and he was charged as being the son of Sam, serial killer who terrorized New York City, killing 6 young people and wounding 7 others with a 44 caliber snub-nose revolver. I can't even imagine like firing that and holding on to it. 44 caliber snub-nose. He generally targeted attractive young women with long brown hair, so hundreds of young women had their hair cut short and dyed blonde during the time he terrorized the city, and thousands more simply stayed home. So it was the Summer of Sam. They made a movie called Summer of Sam. Spike Lee made the movie, which was a pretty interesting movie. I'm not sure how historically accurate it was, but after his arrest, he claimed that demons and a black Labrador retriever owned by the neighbor Sam Carr had ordered him to commit the killings. So they're going to paint him as a lone nut and tell you that he did all this on his own. And maybe there's a little more to the story. So given a little bit more background. So he was brought up by adoptive parents, and this New York Times assumes that he was traumatized by the death of his adoptive mother from cancer in 1967, and became more of a loner, assuming he's a lone nut as well. He joined the Army in 1971, served for 3 years, where he distinguished himself as a talented marksman. And others will say that May says that he went over there as a typist and became a conscientious objector. And that's why he was selected for mind control operations. He returned to New York, worked as a security guard, and his mental condition started to deteriorate. And I don't know how the New York Times knows, but they say that he's feeling isolated from the world around him. He became an arsonist, set hundreds of fires in New York City without being arrested, and began to hear voices of demons that tormented it and told him to commit murder. So on Christmas 1975, he severely wounded 15-year-old Michelle Foreman with a hunting knife. And then in January of 1976, he moved to Yonkers, and that there were some dogs next door that were bothering him. He thought they were possessed. So he decided to move to an apartment up into a higher floor. But his neighbor, retiree Sam Carr, had a black Labrador named Harvey, who Berkowitz believed pleaded with him to kill. And he saw Sam as a powerful demon that controlled him, and referred to him later. He referred to himself later as the son of Sam. Now May refers to him as the son of Uncle Sam because she believes that Uncle Sam made him. So this is in January of 76. Then in the summer, in July, he quit his job as a security guard. And the next morning he walked up to a parked car and fired his 44 revolver, killing 18-year-old Donna Loria instantly. And the boyfriend, Jody Valenti, was wounded, and police couldn't find any motives. Then he committed a series of murders just like this, like walking up to the car, shooting the brown-haired girl, but I think he fired all 5 shots from his 44 into the car almost every time. And so he wounded some people. He killed 6 people. I think he wounded 7 is what they said. So then he's killing throughout the summer. And it also said that on April, all the way through that summer and then into 1977. So then in April, he shot Sam Carr's Labrador retriever. So you would think that the police would start figuring out what was going on. And he was writing letters to the police, taunting letters as well. So this is in April, and he shot the Labrador Retriever, but they still couldn't find him. And then in June, he struck again, wounding Judy Policido and Sal Lupo. They sat in the car after leaving a Queen's disco, and then people started getting really, really upset. They had a 25-hour blackout in mid-July, increasing the paranoia. And then on July 31st, he shot Stacy Moskowitz and then killed her. And then her boyfriend, Bobby Violante, he lost his eye and nearly all of the vision in his right eye. So somehow they couldn't track him down from April all the way through the summer, even though he shot the dog. And they said that a major break in the case came when somebody said they saw him with what looked like a gun minutes before the shots were fired. And that information led to a sketch of Berkowitz. Now, there were a lot of sketches of Berkowitz we're going to see in the rest of the presentation, and doesn't make sense. Like, a lot of the sketches don't look like him, so it'd be kind of hard to track him down based on what they see. And he was arrested outside his Yonkers home on August 10th, and gleefully admitted to being the son of Sam. And he had a semi-automatic rifle, and then he had his 44 caliber revolver. But the story that May talks about, that they associate him, or they found him by looking through parking tickets. His car was double parked, and somehow they found a she called it a submachine gun. I don't know if it's a semi or a submachine gun in the car, along with a big confession. So somehow he left all that in the car to be found by the police after his parking ticket. Now here's a map. So 6 killed, 9 wounded, including 2 stabbings from July 29th, 1976 through July 31st. So right on a year, with a 44 special Bulldog revolver. And he's in the Shawangunk Correctional Facility for life. Here's a map of the killings. There's LaGuardia Airport, Manhattan, Queens, and this Hutchison Parkway. I remember this, and this is the Whitestone Bridge, because my grandmother lives out here on Long Island. My parents lived in Connecticut. So we would drive down the Hutchison Parkway, get on the Whitestone Bridge, and then get on the Long Island Expressway, or I think it was the Cross Bronx Express Parkway or something. We would take that out east to Long Island. So you can see a couple murders in the Bronx, then Queens, and also in Brooklyn that they tied together. Now, let's go back. Go back to the map. So here is the area where he was operating, and a little bit more detail on the map. So he's currently serving 6 life terms in upstate New York Correctional Facility, and he lived on Pine Street in Yonkers, and the house directly south of the apartment complex on the corner lot is where Sam Carr lived, the neighbor who had Harvey the dog that he claimed was possessed by a demon and commanded him to kill. So this is the scene of the Moskowitz Volante shooting. So you can imagine the teenagers parking over there and then running into Berkowitz. This is some drone footage you can see of around his neighborhood. And I took a couple snaps. So Yonkers, just kind of upstate from Manhattan, New York City, on your way up to Connecticut. And all the murders in Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx in that area. And then here is just the bird's eye view of his apartment complex on the Hudson River, which splits between New Jersey and New York. And here's a shot of his actual apartment complex. I think he lived on the 7th floor. Yeah, so those were good shots of the where. So here's an article right after the capture, the arrest, saying, showing the evolution of the suspect via the sketches, which that's a little sketchy considering the sketches that I'll show you down below. Okay, so let's talk about May's coverage a little bit. See if I can get down there. Okay. So May said that he was a conscientious objector in the Korean War, went as a typist, and they mind controlled him on one of the bases in South Korea. And she indicates that both Sam Carr's sons were killed, and she was actually friends, or May was friends with, sorry, Berkowitz was friends with John Carr, and he actually fit the description of multiple people who were seen at the event. And then also John Carr had a yellow Volkswagen that was seen at the departing the murder scenes as well. And May talks about the UCLA Violence Center that Ronald Reagan was trying to spin up in California for the study of violence. Really, it was kind of like a racist center to study and to suppress violence in the African American community. And they, in fact, were associated with that Vacaville prison experiments that they did with Colston Westbrook in the MK Ultra program that led to the Symbionese Liberation Army, the kidnapping of Patty Hearst, and potentially to some of the Manson activities as well. And May thinks that this is connected to Manson. And there are some like coincidental or secondary links back to the Manson family. But she says it's, CIA and military science, and the CIA spent $26 million on LSD experiments at 54 institutions back when $26 million was a lot of money to spend. She points directly to Jolly West at UCLA. She said they turning these ordinary people like Charles Tex Watson turned into killers. That was Manson killer. They're just ordinary people, and they go into the military or they disappear for a year or two and they come back as serial killers. And she talks about in her article, The American Assassins, which is the second part of who kidnapped Martha Mitchell, that they're using Nazi doctors to program people. And indeed, there are a lot of paperclip doctors tied to these types of activities. She also said that there were more killings after he was arrested. She didn't think he was doing it alone. And she referred to a couple killings in California that were similar, where four people were killed, a mother and grandmother and two daughters killed in California. And then the police chief says, hey, there's no maniac here. It's just a perfectly normal killing. No deranged person did this, just a normal killing. She says that's about as sane as the Gestapo and Kristallnacht. And sure, Adolf Hitler would say there's no deranged Nazis. And she thinks that she was upset because she said that police could have had Sam prior to the killings of Stacy Moskowitz. And she believed it was complete bullshit that they found a diary with evidence in the car on the street that they just happened upon, like 9/11 passports floating to the ground so nicely, and the diary and photograph of Lee Harvey Oswald and Sirhan and everything else that Hunt wrote. And she says that usually there's a mysterious court-appointed lawyer and potentially judges, and we're seeing this in modern days, of course, with Ghislaine Maxwell and Epstein, and then the raid on the Trump compound, where the judge just signs off or they hide the truth, and the attorneys are there to limit the damage, to convict the lone nut, and keep the evidence away from anything that ties back to CIA or MK Ultra or the government. She said there's evidence of her doubles, and she refers to the potential for telephone hypnosis. She goes back to talking about Candy Jones, who would receive her instructions on the telephone, and the fact that Sam Carr, the father of the Carr brothers, and the who Berkowitz thought was a demon, was managed an answering service. So he was on the phone all the time, whatever that means anything or not. She thinks that telephone hypnosis may have set Berkowitz off. And then he goes and sells the movie rights, the book scripts, and scripts they profit from it. What are these people, like these publicists and these journalists and these court-appointed lawyers? What they're doing is they're in there to keep the evidence bottled up and to tell a story or a narrative that people can attach to, and then they can scrub it from their mind, just like modern myth makers like Philip Zelikow talked about, telling the story of 9/11 so that people just could have something to hold on to, and they didn't need to investigate any of the evidence. That story sounds, that conspiracy theory sounds really pat, so we can just move on from there. But she said that selected made man attorneys, biographers, and lawyers, judges, they turn these people into patsies when they really don't have any motive. And this is just a snap of all of Jolly West's connections. And he was one of the key MK Ultra mind control people. And I believe he saw Jack Ruby, and I don't know if he saw any of the other assassins. I'm pretty sure he did, because a lot of times they have an appointed psychiatrist as well as attorney, biographers, etc., to go in and cover these things up. And May says there's some eyewitness testimony that describes someone other than Berkowitz in several of these cases. Okay, so we heard the Hallmark story, we heard the New York Times story, we heard that May thought there may be something else to it. So let's talk a little bit about some of the theories that came behind this. So what happened quickly after Berkowitz's arrest, I think within a year or 2 years, is John Carr, who was Sam Carr's son, one of the sons. Michael Carr was the other son. He was murdered or suicided, and Berkowitz used to write to him, and from the Carr family from prison, and he referred to Sam Carr as Sam, my Lord, and Papa God, and that he stated that he was commanded by a 6,000-year-old demon that was talked to him through a dog, and the dog happened to be the pet of Sam Carr, who was John and Michael's father. And then, there's a bunch of serial killers running around the country, a lot of them in California. But Berkowitz confessed to the shootings and was sentenced to life in prison. But then more than a decade later, he alleged that the involvement of a satanic cult, and claimed that he was not alone in the Son of Sam murders, and he had named his neighbors John and Michael Carr as being part of the group that carried out the shootings. So then, I'm trying to find the date on this, when he was killed. Okay, here we go. Yeah. So about 6 months after Berkowitz's arrest, 31-year-old Carr is found dead at his girlfriend's apartment in Minot, North Dakota. So there's an Air Force base in Minot, I think. Apparent suicide where he shot himself, and there's some speculation it might have been a murder. And he was reported to have a daughter. And then in 1979, 2 years later, Michael Carr died in a single car accident in Manhattan. And Michael had struggled with drug and alcohol addiction, joined the Church of Scientology. And then their sister, she didn't deny John's involvement in the occult. And there were only circumstantial evidence apparently connecting her brothers to the murder. So it's getting a little bit sketchier. And this is a gruesome murder, turn your head if you want to, of John Carr. And this is how they found his body, kind of face down, turned over with the rifle laying on his foot. And it looks like he was shot standing up. And judging the blood splatter on the wall there. So did he hold the rifle up and shoot himself in the face and then fall over and have the rifle land on his foot? It's kind of strange, like a little odd. And they also said that there were blood smudges on the wall and apparent blood writing on the baseboard, and on his hand, you can't see it, but there's remnants of a 666 appeared carved into the drying blood on his hands. So both brothers, they also remarkably resembled early police sketches of the killers. But despite these clues, police never followed up with the Carr family. So the police never pursued those clues. And both brothers died under mysterious accidental circumstances years after the killings, which increased um, this author's suspicions that they were involved with the crimes and were killed for knowing too much. So, another really strange piece of this case is that Berkowitz wrote some letters to the media, and he knew the intimate details of Arliss Perry's slaying, and they weren't available to the media. And John Carr was stationed in Minot. Arliss was from Bismarck, and they were both connected to cult activity. So Arliss was a young woman from Bismarck, and she was like devout Christian, but there were some Satanists or occult people in her town. She was seen trying to convert them at one point. Then, when she moved to Stanford and got married, she died under very mysterious circumstances in what appeared to be a satanic ritual killing. She was laid over the altar of this church at Stanford in a very just horrific and compromising killing there. And John Carr was suspected of being connected to some of these occult activities in North Dakota. Here's a few other pieces of evidence from or statements from this book that was written about this. Said we've got ex-Yonkers cop Peter Shane with the 44 Bulldog. We have a dead Howard Weiss, supposedly had one too. We've got both Weiss and Shane tied to Berkowitz, was also had a 44 Bulldog. And now right around the corner from Berkey, we've got Johnson, suspected of committing the crimes in just the right categories. And he's got a 44 Bulldog too. What are the odds of that? And in this case, the sketches of the individuals, the composites that they made to identify by eyewitnesses at the scene, they had a wide divergence, and that was a problem. And there were allegations that there were more than one vehicle involved, and that the time frame that the killer getting from one place to another there were a lot of serious questions. So this came from this 1,000-page book that I just kind of cracked into on the case. And there are a lot of fascinating tie-ins that this author made. And I have a link to that up above. So, yeah, so there's John Carr's suicide again. And then just to go through, like, here's some of his victims. So going kind of down from Berkowitz, here's Arliss Perry, who was killed in California in the ritual killing. And then Stacy Moskowitz, who was killed. You saw the picture of the car where she was killed. And then Christine Freund. And then this is a composite sketch of one of the killers of Donna Lauria. And the sketch was given by, it must have been the man who was in the car with her, who was not killed. And so that, if you take a look at these sketches, the composite sketches that they made, and compare those to Berkowitz, there's a little bit of divergence there. And notice the long hair here, and the part on the other side, and then the straight hair. We have one with wavy hair. So there's a lot of stuff going on. And if you look at this picture here, this first picture, well, let's compare that back to John Carr. Sorry, and that's the point that they're making here, that, hey, that looks like a lot more like John Carr than David Berkowitz. Yeah, and here's some of the notes that he wrote to the police. And then this was actually turned, this Ultimate Evil, this 1,000-page book written by this investigative journalist Maury Terry, was turned into a Netflix series. I already canceled my Netflix, so I might have to renew it for a couple of days so I can binge on this Netflix series, Son of Sam. And then some other like resources that you could look at. Just get some of these links. Yeah, so here's the book, The Ultimate Evil, and you can actually download that. And that's where I took some of this from. Here's the article. And then, yeah, this was a cool article on Veterans Today about Mae Brussell, the forgotten superhero. And yeah, so hopefully, like, gave you a good overview of the case and spurred some areas for discussion and other areas for an investigation. I'd like to get through that 1,000-page book because there's so much in there, and there's so many things that tie together. It's just unbelievable what these people were doing on the mind control front. And David Berkowitz certainly he had the means and the motive, that being that he was a conscientious objector, and the opportunity to mind control him at bases in South Korea when he was stationed there in the early 70s. And, that they certainly were running these black sites and experimenting on people, turning people into mind controlled assassins. And you can watch that Darren Brown show on, they did it just with hypnotism, but I can imagine that the combination of the hypnotism and the drugs be much more powerful. And you can go to Candy Jones. We might do a segment on her, or like Kay Griggs, or even Juliet Engel talks about the mind control and the personality splitting and the traumatic ritual abuse to get people to split and then to be able to control them and to have them act in accordance with their orders, no matter what they are, and at their own peril, or be able to hide secret information in one personality and then be able to recall that and then subsequently forget that as needed by making that one personality go dormant. So there's all kinds of resources that talk about these things. And I think Sam, there's a high probability that he was a mind control victim. And yep, also a killer and deeply disturbed individual. What do you all think?
Certainly a lot to digest there. This is the first time that I really, heard anything about the Son of Sam killing, other than the kind of the newspapers and stuff like that. I was, I think it was a kid in 1977, about 9-10 years old, so I didn't really pay any attention to this particular story. But in regard to the mind control thing, I think these kind of experiments that went on in the 60s and 70s have certainly continued into the social media era. And if you watch the surveillance capitalism documentary, in one part they talk about the Facebook contagion experiment in 2012 and 2013, I believe, where they, essentially gave like subliminal messaging through the, through the Facebook, and kind of created a situation in which, people's moods were changed, and then those moods were like contagious. And basically, once the people were experiencing those particular kinds of moods, then they were able to then give them suggestions on what to do next. And they actually got people to go places, like actually went to places without them really being conscious of what they were doing.
So they were able to get people to take the subliminal message through Facebook, create a mood, and then have people act.
Yeah, and it relates to like when people are in particular moods, then they're more suggestible to particular things, and them being able to know those combinations and experiment with those combinations, they were able to direct people to do things. And then I just wanted to point out that there's another article in the Scientific American back in 2008. I don't remember the has to do with the article's name is How Unconscious Mechanisms Affect Thought, from October of 2008, written by Christoph Koch. Koch, Koch,
Okay.
But in
2008.
that he talks about what it call continuous flash suppression, and the idea that they could hide kind of subconscious messaging within screens, and so that people won't consciously see them, but subconsciously they'll be affected by them, and it talks about showing a picture of a naked person and a angry person, and although the people can't consciously see them, they're affected by them, and it creates it alters their mood.
So can you feel that when you're watching TV? Because sometimes I can feel that and I have to turn it off.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I mean, that's the thing is with what I'm thinking is, like, with the amount of screen time that they're creating for people to, like, be watching their phone and watching their their computer screen as well as their TV, and the ability to kind of make these suggestions, plus this history of doing this to people.
Yes.
They've kind of built this kind of pattern here that just keeps going to a larger audience. And I don't know if you remember the movie Strange Brew, but there's a part in that movie where there's like two different teams of hockey teams, and I don't know, I guess they feed them a particular kind of beer, but then they play some strange music, and then they go and they fight each other.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I just thought, it all seems to kind of relate that, now they've got it to the point that they're, steering people towards kind of conflicting positions in mass. And, I don't know, there's a lot of conflicts going out around in the world. But when you look at, like, Rwanda, and then, some of the other things where the CIA were kind of programming the populace, uh, you know, you got to wonder, and certainly, like, what's going on in Ukraine. If you look at the way that people are, running into battle when they should just be walking away, it makes you wonder about, like, how much control do they got over people, and is this just a sign of things to come in the future?
Yeah. And that's one thing about that Delgado talks about, is being able to influence people so that they can become, zombie armies, basically.
Yeah.
And Michael, I think I remember in the maybe late 60s, early 70s, they were actually doing that subliminal messaging in movie theaters, where they'd be flashing, like, it was so fast you didn't pick it up consciously, but you'd see a picture of, like, a Coca-Cola, and people would go and they want a Coca-Cola, and I think it was outlawed, supposedly at some point. But yeah, you reminded me of that.
Yeah, well, I think they've been experimenting with a lot of different things, and they're getting to the point that they've got it down to I think they've got it down.
To trust the science, yeah.
So, why do they have to have all these cell towers with all these sophisticated military grade broadcasters on there? my cell service hasn't improved one iota since they put all that stuff up, and it has like 100% coverage everywhere. I'm wondering if that's for my benefit. I don't know what that's all about.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, you know, it certainly goes into that surveillance capitalism kind of ideal, where you know they don't really. I mean, if you look at the price of cell phones in like the United States and the price of cell phones and cell service in like Mexico, you'll see a tremendous difference in the price. But yet they want everybody to have one. You know, so they're basically pricing the stuff so that everybody can have one.
Yeah. Well, then it's mandated in some schools. Actually, you can't. You have to have an Apple product to get your curriculum delivered and things like that, or a Microsoft product.
Crazy.
yeah, they sent me a new phone when they were changing the system around here. They were going to 5G or something like that, and my phone was 3G or something, and they just sent me a new phone and said your phone's going to be deleted soon. So, it was, pretty freaky. So,
So we have the Apple, we have Apple phones. I had one from work. We were riding up to Austin on a trip, and my wife was chatting with me, and she had been typing a message or something on her phone. And like 10 minutes later, I was like, what's going on with your phone? Because I saw that text was just building, and it had recorded everything that we said and turned it into a text message.
oh yeah. Yeah, I was doing a little digging into this, Tim, and like Jones and Manson, these guys are all protected. They're allowed to continue to do their killings, and then the people behind them, of course, are protected. And I was researching this cop. His name was Mike Cadella. He was like a super cop that brought down a big heroin ring in Alphabet City in Lower Manhattan on the east side. And by the way, I was living there at the time of this Son of Sam thing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I was like pretty, it was like we were all like watching it, and pretty, that strategy of tension thing, man. Everybody was pretty freaked out. I mean, it was happening away from us. I lived in Soho in Lower Manhattan, but anyway, Berkowitz started talking about this stuff after. At first he was like saying it was the dog, and a lot of the cop thinks that was just a way to try to get a plead for insanity. But when he started talking eventually with some people inside and maybe some newspaper people, and it wasn't very long until they tried to slit his throat, and they missed the jugular.
Oh my goodness.
But he shut up after that. But he was talking about the satanic church, the process church of final judgment. And there's an interesting little history about that, and it's tied to Scientology, the Church of Scientology.
Yeah.
But
they said that one of the Carr brothers was hanging out in Fort Lauderdale at the Scientology church. And I think maybe Berkowitz was on vacation down there too.
Right. Yeah. So there's some weird ties there. And then this super cop, he gets put onto cold cases, and he's digging into some of the Berkowitz killings that really were not completely.
They didn't investigate them after they arrested him, much like any of the other assassinations, right? They have their man. They don't need to do any investigation. They just cover up the real whatever happened.
Right. But this guy, Cadella, was starting to dig into it, and he got a line on. He started talking to the guys that used to protect the church. There was a gang, there was a motorcycle gang. They were called the Rat Pack, and they protected the church while they were doing their rituals at their mansions and stuff like that. And he wanted to get out and, get out early out of prison. So he contacted Cadella because he knew he was related to the case. Anyway, Cadella said, look, I got some connections. And he connected with Eaton Patz. That was the first kid that was on the milk cartons for the runaways, for the kidnappings. right? So that was in Manhattan. And so this guy in jail, they called him Tiny. His name was John Latini or something like that. He made the connection through this Church of Satan with this Ethan Patz kid, and that Berkowitz was part of that whole thing. Then he got him connected to another one of his gang members, and this guy started to like name names on the inside, and he really started to have some big leads.
Yeah.
And he was still with the department, and the police department shut it down right away. He couldn't pursue it. He started pursuing it later after he got out of the department, but that was, it's all protected.
So you guys are familiar with the Dutroux case in Belgium?
Which one?
Marc Dutroux in Belgium, where he was like a Dahmer or Gacy type pedophile serial killer, but he supplied the elites with young girls, and he was protected. And then they finally arrested him. I think he served a short sentence and then was released. And then the killings continued, and the people came out, like 350,000 people came out to protest in that little tiny country of Belgium. So they basically shut down the government and said, "You guys better take care of this business," because he was connected at the highest levels. He's protected, and I think that's what's going on. Anybody who gets too close to the third rail ends up dead. Yeah. So I think it's probably, there's that cult aspect of it, but there's also a lot of money involved. And just like any mafia organization or drug running organization, they're going to protect their suppliers and their turf. Yeah. James, thanks for joining. Do you have anything you want to chip in?
Thanks for having me, Tim. I'm actually appreciating listening to everything, and it's kind of jarring some things loose in my brain that I don't know that I can actually offer as anything useful at the moment. But when you were talking about the blackout that occurred in New York in, what was that, 77, I think?
Yeah, that's summer. 25 hours.
Yeah, 25 hours, exactly. Do you think that with everything that was going on in New York City at that time and the state of fear that was essentially hanging over the city, do you think it's possible that blackout might have been engineered in order to whip people up into an even greater frenzy?
Yeah, I think that's a great observation and entirely possible. And if you get a chance to watch that Summer of Sam movie, when they have the blackout, like, people are just terrorized. And I don't know, like, New York City and San Francisco and California seem to be microcosms of these experiments, like these social experiments that people are running. And it's like, it's so surveilled. They have like rats in an experimental cage up there, and they could just do anything they wanted to try on people. So I wouldn't put it past them to pull the plug on the lights for a day and just to heighten the tension. Yeah. Well, that makes sense. Well, gentlemen, we're coming up on the hour, and I'm just thrilled that you're here, and I appreciate your support. And we'll have to come up with our subject for next week. Might be on vacation. We'll see if the missus lets me put the hours in next week. So it might be 2 weeks out, but we'll come up with the next subject. There's so much here. Hopefully we did May proud and pull back some of the onion just a little bit further. And I've been in touch with the people trying to preserve May's research. So that's really been interesting and fun. And Michael's helped me out a little bit with some project management plans there. So moving things forward, we're getting the word out and connecting the dots. So hopefully you guys are getting value, and I really appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Tim.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Tim.
Thank you,
Appreciate
guys.
all you're doing.
All right, we'll see you next